when it comes to the history of mathematics and the history of science, there is one individual that has influenced the field of knowledge more than anybody else, I would argue. That individual will be Sir Isaac Newton. Born in 1642 on Christmas Day, and he died in 1727. Isaac Newton did something to science that literally gave it an edge and an advantage to just keep growing and flourishing as a field of study. As a matter of fact, multiple fields of study come from the work that Isaac Newton did. I'm going to read you a few quotes, and then I'll explain why I believe Newton is probably one of the key figures the world that science owes a lot of gratitude to. So here's a quote from Thomas Hill from this book, which is called History of Mathematics. It says, "The discoveries of Newton have done more for England and for the race than has been done by whole dynasties of British monarchs." The discoveries of Newton have done more for England and for the race than has been done by the whole dynasties of the British monarchs. Now, in the 1600s, there was a field of study that had been flourishing called astronomy. Who are some of the key people in astronomy? We have people like Copernicus, Tycho Brahe, Johannes Kepler. We had Galileo Galilei, and then of course we got Isaac Newton, who was born the year that Galileo died. In the study of the history of science, there are a few key people that almost everybody either knows or that have done things that influence almost everything we do every day. One of them is Isaac Newton. His story is discussed in this book, Journey Through Genius, which is actually the book that inspired me to start studying the history of mathematics and science back in 2008, 2009, when I was doing organic chemistry in an organic chemistry lab. I'm pretty sure that was where I read a little bit of this book, which I found in the math lab. But there's a section of this book I read, which I'm going to read in this series. We're going through a series, Science and the Scientific Revolution, and we're going to be talking about the people and the theories in science and mathematics in the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. But as I said, there's a few people, and I'll tell you who these people are. Now, of course, there's some women who are involved in mathematics as well that you might not have heard of them, but there are some women. Unfortunately, at that time, there were some women that actually had to write letters as pretending to be a man just because they were trying to make sure that the guys took them seriously, right? Blaise Pascal, I believe, interacted with one of those people. And we'll talk about women in mathematics in a different video. But let's talk about 5 men that were involved in mathematical advancement. Isaac Newton, James Clerk Maxwell. This book is about James Clerk Maxwell and Michael Faraday. Leonhard Euler. This book is called Euler, the Master of Us All. Carl Friedrich Gauss, who is discussed in this book. And so we have, we have Newton, we have Euler, we have Gauss, we have James Clerk Maxwell, and then we talk about Albert Einstein, who comes later on in the 1900s. But let's read a little bit about this chapter called A Gem from Newton. It says, if the 16th century saw a quickened pace of mathematical activity, the 17th century would bring an absolute onslaught of innovation and discovery. The greatest innovations and discoveries we're seeing come from around the 1600s into 1700s. We had astronomy before Newton, but we didn't have the mathematics to describe the solar system well. So it was in the 1660s that Newton gave us some of this work that we talk about in differential calculus to explain the motion of the planets. And he tried to connect that to the work of objects falling, like gravitational force. There's actually a book called 5 Equations That Changed the World. 5 Equations That Changed the World. And one of them, or actually the first one on this page, is the gravitational force equation. So Isaac Newton gave us the language to explain scientific phenomena. We're going to spend some time on Isaac Newton because this guy was one of the best in mathematics and also one of the best in physics. I don't know if you know, but he also did a lot of work in theology. Not that I agree with all his theology, but he did some work in theology, and Dr. Stephen Meyer in his book, The Return of the God Hypothesis, along with some of the other books that Dr. Meyer has written, talk about the influence or the quotes of Newton, talking about, though these bodies may continue by the laws of gravity, they could not have derived their very positions by these very laws. Thus, this system of the sun, planets, and solar system could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. So Newton then goes on to explain about his belief in God. This was in the Principia, by the way, one of the most prestigious and the most sophisticated, the best science books ever written. And Newton shared about his faith. Before I go on, I do want to mention briefly, I've written a book on math called Tools for Mastering Mathematics, and then I have one called STEM Excellence, How to Raise the Next Generation of Scientists, Mathematicians, and Thinkers. And so I want to share with you some of what led to the rise of people like Isaac Newton. Yes, there's talent involved, but it's also about the timing and the atmosphere. So it says that it has come to be called the heroic century in the history of mathematics because of the intellectual giants who came and went during those productive years. At this time, the focus of activity in Europe shifted northward from the talented Italian algebraists of the previous chapters that we discussed to an array of French, German, and British thinkers. French, German, and British thinkers. Think about Blaise Pascal, René Descartes, Pierre de Fermat, right? Think about Leibniz, Gottfried Leibniz, and then think about Isaac Newton. You see that there's stuff going on geographically, right? Okay, the causes of the shift were certainly many, and as with any human endeavor, involved a healthy dose of just pure opportunity and chance, is what this author would say. But some scholars, in noting this phenomenon, have attached importance to the relative freedom of inquiry in Northern Europe as contrasted with harsh restrictions imposed by a religious atmosphere in Italy. Now, keep in mind that just because, in Italy at this time, we know some things that happened with Galileo. There's debates about that, though. There's debates, and John Lennox, I think, makes a good case there, too. But it's a very sophisticated topic. We're not going to get into it right now, but unfortunately, within that bureaucracy in the church in Italy, it led to some pushback on scientific advancement. But science itself and the truth that is found through scientific discovery, the things that are discovered, do not go against the Bible. God's word is the origin, is the foundation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So I really want us to be careful about the Bible itself versus a religious establishment that might have hindered certain pieces of science at this time in history. So just wanted to make sure we know that God's word still speaks truth into how the universe, like the universe came, God created the universe. We study it and we can do the mathematics, we can do the mathematical calculations because God created the universe. So the fate of Galileo is the debate I'm talking about. There was a debate. The historians of science will argue. Some would say that Galileo being under house arrest and the harsh reality that he faced was essentially, people would look at it that way and say, oh, it's not that bad. And others would say, oh, it was very bad. So please know that there's a debate. We're not going to get into that in this video. But we can say, suffice it to say, that there was more freedom of thought north of Italy. Now, the Reformation happening in Germany, right, that gives them a little of an advantage. And the author talks about that here. And I actually argue that the causes of the scientific revolution were, we had the printing press in the 1450s, which laid the groundwork for distribution of knowledge. We had the Copernican revolution, which is the right view of the sun as the center of the solar system. So you have printing press, you have the right view of the solar system, and then you have the Reformation. So 1450 printing press, 1517 to 1520, we have the Reformation happening. We have Copernican revolution and his writings coming about 1550. So from 1450 to 1550, the groundwork is set. Now, of course, there was also exploration. The age of exploration had happened or was happening. So it's when people are given the opportunity with what the Reformation did, one of the things it did of allowing more people to be reading and studying the Bible, it allows for more people to be thinking a certain way, which I believe was a healthy thing to happen. So the world was ready for something between 1550 and 1600. Something was bound to happen. And then Galileo happens to come along, and then he carries on the work of Copernicus, or carries on that that view Copernicus gave. So we have that happening. So by 1640, do you see the stage is set, and Newton comes to the stage and he has the mathematical discoveries. Now you put what was going on in the world with Newton's mathematics, and look what happened in the 1700s. We get Euler, the master of us all. We get Carl Friedrich Gauss. We get Daniel Bernoulli, who's involved in one of the equations here. We get all of these people, and they all lived in the 1700s. Not only the mathematicians and scientists, but did you know that the musicians, the classical musicians, look up George Frederick Handel. Look at some of these people. 1700s were like one of the sweetest parts of human discovery. And there was also a lot of turmoil in the world in the 1700s, which is another day's story. Which then, of course, in the 1700s, America became a nation, right? So the 1700s, right? That's a great 100 years to just study. Okay, let's land the plane. We'll continue our study here, so feel free to subscribe for more videos on this. This will be included in our course on Teachable on the history of science. So, it says, all was not freedom and openness in the North, yet the heritage of the Reformation seemed to favor the kind of unfettered inquiry that would loosen the intellect of a Kepler or Descartes or Newton. It is possible that in attempting to impose an inflexible orthodoxy, the church in Italy, unfortunately, had put Italy to a second-class citizenship in science. It was not mathematics alone that was flourishing as the 16th century became the 17th century. In 1607, the British settled at Jamestown, and the European colonization of the New World began in earnest. A few years before Jamestown, Galileo had investigated the motion of falling bodies with such care and ingenuity that he forever altered the nature of physics. 2 years after Jamestown, the same Galileo turned the recently invented spyglass toward the heavens and launched modern astronomy, even as he simultaneously began the journey that would lead to the personal crisis already mentioned. And not to overlook the arts, we should recall that Cervantes wrote his monumental Cervantes' work came out in 1605, while in 1601 an English playwright called William Shakespeare had written a play he called Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Obviously, cultural landmarks do not fit themselves neatly into 100-year intervals, and it was in the later years of the previous century that the first signs appeared of the mathematical revolution that was in store. A heroic century needs heroes, and we shall take a brief look at some of them. Wow, pretty cool stuff. We have some more stuff to dissect as we talk about René Descartes and Blaise Pascal. I'm excited to dive into more of these conversations with you. But why don't we pause here and just acknowledge that something was cooking in the 15 and 1600s, and certain individuals were pivotal in advancing science and mathematics specifically. By Newton giving us some of the tools of calculus, we got a key to open the doors to a new realm, and that's part of the realm that we're still operating in. There are many branches of mathematics. We'll have a different video for that. But stay tuned for more videos. If you want to support our work, you can join the subscription-based model of my class, because by doing that, it gives you access to all the classes that I have, videos in physics and chemistry, videos in math and all different branches of math, videos in the history of science, videos in career preparation. So basically, the subscription allows you to have access to everything. My book, Tools for Mastery Mathematics, is available in the link you can use, or you can email amosthestemguy@gmail.com if you would like to read the book. Let me know if you have any questions, or if you need tutoring, coaching, mentoring for academics, let me know. We'd love to talk to you and your family. So take care, have a blessed day, and we'll pick it up from Isaac Newton's story in the next video in our series on science in the scientific revolution. Have a blessed day.